I guess we'll start at the start. So you said you grew up in Tasmania.
Yes, I did. Born and raised in Hobart and surrounds. And it wasn't a great upbringing from 6 years old to about 10, 11 years old. I lived in a really rough neighbourhood, and that was every day living in fear because there were break-ins or they would stab or attack my dog. There would be like constant noises at night. So from 6 to 10, it was like every night I was like, what's that noise? Or my dad would go out with a bat because someone was in our yard, and at 6 to 10 years old, your thought is my dad going to come back through the door? Because you don't really know how to assess danger at that age.
Well, I think when we look at, like when we go through your full story, I want to see how all these things tie together because you've had a bit of a rough start to your life. You're a young mother, single mother now, working with, youth at risk, working as a counsellor and now recently been diagnosed with MS.
Yep.
I want to see how that all sort of links up.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so do you think that these troubling sort of early years had effects on your life and which directions and decisions you made?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can't really have an upbringing like I had and it not affect your life. And statistically speaking, the people that went through things that I went through as a child and then as a youth with the situations that I got myself involved in, statistically speaking, it continues to be a downward spiral. And I know that because I work in that environment now. And I think for me, my biggest thing was I had my daughter to fight for. So it was like I have to do better and be better for her because it's never been for me, I want to do better for myself. It's I want to do better for myself so that my daughter has better and can do better. Yeah.
How did growing up in a rough area, I guess, affect your parents and your family unit?
Yeah. So it was myself and my sister, who's 5 years older than I am, and my mum and my dad. And once we were eventually able to leave that neighbourhood, my mum and dad separated. My sister at the time, I think, really focused on self-improvement, and she got a scholarship to one of the best private schools in Tasmania, went to university, was 6 months off graduating her French and journalism degree, didn't finish, went to New Caledonia to teach English because she was fluent in French, and came back and was sort of never really the same. My mum always believed that something untoward happened in New Caledonia to her. My opinion is I think it was the effect of our upbringing affected my sister later than it affected me. I dealt with it as a teenager. She dealt with it as an adult. And as a result, she's now an alcoholic and I haven't had anything to do with her for a good 5 years. None of our family has. Yeah.
Is it as simple as like the financial stress on the family? Like I was thinking about what you said earlier with regards to the crime in the area affecting the price of the property. Talk us through that bit.
So once we'd moved in and my parents at the time didn't realise this was a bad area, it became very evident very quickly that it was.
So they bought a house?
Yes, yeah. And then they couldn't resell it for enough because apparently everyone else but my parents knew it was a bad suburb. So no one was interested. And they did try. We would have open days and then the neighbours would come out and throw beer bottles and graffiti the sign and do everything in their power to make it really hard for us to move. Like they got joy out of knowing we're torturing this family and they're stuck here. But my mum was case noting consistently over these years to try and get the Department of Housing to buy the house so that they could rent it out as a Department of Housing property so that we could move on and be safe and be a family. So that did eventually end up happening, but it was sort of too little too late by that stage.
Well, I put myself in your parents' situation there.
Yeah.
Like how would that have affected their life?
As a child, obviously I wasn't thinking about that. As an adult and I reflect on it, it's like I can totally understand why they would separate. That situation alone puts so much stress and pressure and trauma on any relationship. Like, how do you move forward? Like, some people can, but a lot of people can't. It's a lot to deal with.
Do you have memories from that time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's probably, I think, my way of my brain's coping with the trauma is to block a lot of it out. So I actually don't have that many memories of my childhood, but the ones I do have are of that time period. And it's all themes of fear. Yeah.
Wow. So where did you move to from there?
So we temporarily moved into a rental property and it was just sort of short term. And after that, or I think it was sort of during that, my memory, sorry, is a bit blurry. We moved again and my mum moved somewhere else and I stayed with my dad. My sister and myself stayed with my dad. And mum was just sort of up the road. So I was probably like grade 5, grade 6 then, and my sister had started high school.
When you talk to your parents, do you still talk to both your parents?
Yeah.
When you talk to them about this time, do they identify that was like, if that, like, what do they say about it?
I think that was a big part in their breakup, but there was more to it. My mum and my dad are very different people. And my mum's got her own history and her own mental health. And I think that was predominantly what caused the separation was my mum's mental health.
Was there much support around for a family that's going through that? Were you just like in the regular schools? Were you out in the sort of rougher parts of Tassie? What was the life like after your parents split up?
In terms of support, I remember my parents were putting me in various counsellors and they were organisations like similar to Relationships Australia or Uniting Care, the things that we have up here. So they had that there. But I think, again, now being someone that works in this domain of child and youth counselling, a lot of people enter into this field not having any lived experience. And I think it's so important because you just can't relate if you have no experience. And that was my experience as a young girl. I couldn't relate to these people. You can just tell when people know or not. Yeah. Well,
you've got exactly lived experience. What was life like? What sort of you said before when we were talking before? Tell us about the schooling and getting kicked out and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I was at an all-girls school for year 7 and 8 in Tasmania. At the end of year 8,
was there any problems or issues?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I sort of wasn't showing up or I would show up and leave. And it was probably end of year 7, start of year 8 that I met this girl that sort of at the time it sounded like this really exciting, interesting life. And she was dating a guy in his 30s. And again, now as an adult, I'm like, that's so messed up. But at the time I was like, oh, that's exciting. And she was sort of involved in drugs and he was this drug lord. Like he had his eye cut out by a machete. Like he was the real deal sort of guy. And I found it all very interesting. And I think that was my way of escaping my trauma at the time. I just didn't realise.
And this is year 8, year 9?
This was year 8.
So how old are you in year 8? Like 14, 15?
14, yeah.
So what makes a young girl, 14-year-old, attracted to danger and bad decisions?
I think
because I reckon there'd be a lot of parents out there wondering that.
Yeah. I think not just for me, I think for a lot of people, young people that get involved in this youth crime and drugs and alcohol and all the rest of it is a lack of connection and a lack of connection to self. And when people talk about youth crime and like, what are we going to do? Locking them away and all of these sort of rules, that doesn't work. Putting in rules doesn't work. It's connection to community, connection to self that works. And that's what worked for me eventually. Like took me a while, but I got there.
So what was your behaviour like so end of year 8, you got kicked out of that school. Was that off the back of drugs and playing up?
Yeah, so it was probably like midway through year 8 that I really heavily started to get involved in drugs and alcohol. So drinking a lot, smoking a lot of weed. And then it was sort of end of year 8, year 9 that I started to get involved in other drugs. So pills, ecstasy. And I was probably still 14 the first time I ever tried speed, and it was in the back of a car and my friend was shooting it down my throat from a syringe and I was 14 and I didn't question it. It was like, fuck yeah.
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 And what about sex? Where did you lose your virginity and what happened? I imagine the two go hand in hand.
Oh, absolutely. So I was 13.
Wow.
And like now that I have a teenage daughter and I reflect on these things, I mean, our experiences are so vastly different. But as a mother, I go, that's hard. I'm heartbroken for myself that as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, I was out there doing all these things and I didn't have the connection I needed to stop that for myself. So I lost my virginity at 13 to a guy that was older than me. He was probably in his 20s from memory. Again, didn't really see it as being a big deal at the time. And from there on in, especially once I got really involved in drugs, I was having sex quite frequently. I would say a lot of the time it wasn't what I really wanted to do, but it just sort of came part and parcel with the lifestyle that I was in.
What about your relationship with family then? I mean, I couldn't imagine you'd be too connected to or are you just lying to everyone or?
Initially, I think I was getting away with it when it was early days and I was sort of just starting out in drinking and taking drugs. It got to the point where I didn't try lying to my parents. They just sort of knew, and I think they were so at a loss. I think as well for youth, you get to a point where you go, what's the worst that can happen? And I was at that point where it was like, what's the worst that can happen? And it was this, I had no fear. I had no fear of consequences. So then it was like, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want or what others want me to do.
Did you do any crime?
Yeah, yep. Like I was stealing quite frequently at one stage. Clothes, I guess that hasn't changed. I've always enjoyed fashion. I can actually afford it now, whereas at the time it was theft. I got caught for it once and it was just sort of a slap on the wrist. I think they called my parents. I don't have a huge memory of that other than the being caught. That was probably the main crime.
Just off people's clotheslines in their backyard?
Oh, no, sorry, like in shops.
Right,
yeah,
okay, shoplifting.
Yep. Yeah.
Right. So the people that you were around, did you witness any mad things? Like was there any sort of traumatic things that you got to witness?
Yeah. I, to this day, go, how did I not get severely hurt or dead?
Severely hurt or dead?
Yes, yeah. Those were, and my mum at the time was saying that to me. She's like, I'm waiting for the police to knock at my door and tell me that my daughter's been found dead somewhere. And I was like, oh, fuck off, Mum, you're being ridiculous. But, I was consistently high at this stage. Yeah. My sister actually had this really bad bacterial infection and it sort of wreaked havoc on her body for a while. And so she had all these drugs. And so like I would be rummaging through my sister's drug drawers.
As in medicine, as in
prescribed
drugs.
Yeah, looking for any sort of drug that would create a high. Yeah.
Really sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with you, I guess, getting started on all that stuff early, is that sort of what led you to, I guess, being pregnant and having a child so young?
Yeah, I would say so, because I met my daughter's dad through his brother. He was one of my regular weed dealers, and so that's how that sort of connection happened. And then I got in a relationship with him, and I was smoking cigarettes and smoking weed at that time, and I'd sort of stopped everything else. And when I found out that I was pregnant, I had really bad morning sickness really early on, like really severe. I couldn't keep water down. And I believe that was sort of my first step towards healing and stopping everything, because initially I couldn't. Like I was so sick that I couldn't smoke cigarettes or I couldn't smoke weed. I couldn't even keep water down. So it was immediately off the table from pretty much as soon as I had that positive pregnancy test. So I think in a way that was a great blessing because it forced me into sobriety. And once you're past that period of the really hard giving up stage, it's much easier.
So in a way, your daughter saved you, like, I guess, in that regard. And so what happened with her father? What was the relationship like? How long did it last?
Yeah, well, probably together for close to a year, I would say. Just under a year. The relationship wasn't great. I mean, he and his family were lower socioeconomic class. Their family was involved in drugs and alcohol to an extent, just not very smart people in any sense of the word. And he would do things which at the time again, too young and naive to really realise.
How old was he?
He was...
So you were 17?
Yeah, so I was 16, probably just turned 16 when we got together. And he was early 20s from memory. He was definitely older than me. Again, didn't think anything of it. But he would tell me like I would have to wear makeup. Like I couldn't be out of the house without makeup on. And when I was pregnant and really sick and I would be in bed all day and literally surrounded by buckets and bags of vomit. And he would come home, and this was his parents' house, and he would come home from work and he would get angry at me because I hadn't gone out and talked to his parents. And like he could see that.
Yeah, things weren't going good.
Yeah.
Was there ever any abuse? Do you ever like deal with it? I know you've mentioned drugs and I mean the third sort of spike in that is the abuse side. Is there any abuse?
Yeah. Just before I left him, he started to progress to physical abuse, and that's sort of what led to me leaving Tasmania because my mum was like, you're pregnant, you're having this kid, let's have a fresh start.
And so where did you have your child? In Tasmania?
No, she was born in Tweed Head Hospital because...
And were your parents and family there for that?
My mum was. Right. So my mum lives in Brisbane. She moved up with me and the rest of my family's in Tassie still. Yeah.
Do your parents do drugs or anything like that, or
no?
Like it's such a. I don't know how. Did this break their hearts to see all this?
For my mum, yes. My dad, I would say it still hurt him. He's just less shows less emotion outwardly. I have a great relationship with my dad. He just has a different way of showing how he cares. So I remember more of the emotion coming from mum in terms of the heartbreak and being upset. And dad just sort of, he probably just gave up in the sense because he knew I wasn't going to stop until I was good and ready.
Was there any times where he really tried to communicate that to you?
Not that I have memory of. I remember I was so manipulative as well. I would tell him that I couldn't give up drugs and cigarettes at the same time, so you're going to have to buy me cigarettes. And he did that thinking that I was giving up drugs, but I was just manipulating him and continuing to do both. I think he was doing everything he could in his power that he thought was...
It's funny, I think as a parent, even though you do all sorts of sort of crazy things, I think as a parent you just want your kid to make it and stay around. And I think the fact that you were close to him at least was probably part of, you know, what he was happy about, or at least a sense of relief that he still had contact with you. You never cut him off or anything like that, you know? No. And so your child's born, you're now in Brisbane, you're in Queensland.
Yeah.
What's raising a daughter by yourself like? Like what's the first sort of 10 years? Like where were the hardships there?
The hard part for me was still being so young, and when I started to make friends in Brisbane and would go out to bars and I'd drink, then I'd want a cigarette. Yeah. So I wasn't smoking, but if I was drinking, I'd have a cigarette. So it would be those sort of incidences for probably like I would say a good 5 years.
But what about the drugs side of things?
I still smoked weed. Yeah. Again, it wasn't like a full-time habit. And there was one trip that I made back to Tasmania, caught up with old friends and went out and I took a bunch of pills and I had...
Because you're only like 18, 19 now, right? Yeah. So you're still a kid really.
Yeah. And that night that I had all the pills. We also came home, and that was probably one of the nights where I could have died 100%, not necessarily because of the drugs, but because we were all out in the city, piled back up in the car. Like there were people in the boot. The person was driving, was really drunk, on drugs, and it wasn't a short trip home. The fact that all of us made it back home alive is just, I don't know how that happened. And I continued to take more drugs that night. And for a good while afterwards, I was in a bit of a drug-induced psychosis. And my dad took me to hospital, and the hospital sort of was basically like, you're an idiot for taking drugs. I pretty much said everything but that. Here's some Valium, go away. And that was probably the moment where I was like, I'm never touching this stuff ever again, because I came so close to losing my life in a variety of ways in that one night. I could have died in a car accident. I could have overdosed on drugs, and I could have lost my mental health so severely from the drug-induced psychosis that I was physically here but mentally not here.
What's the drug-induced psychosis like?
It's pretty awful. But again, now working with people who experience this, it's I never disclose that to my clients, but I can relate to them, and it's just an energy. You know when people understand you or when they just don't get it.
But describe it. What does it feel like?
The first thing for me was I would look at my hand. It's a very out of body experience. So it's like I'm here, but I don't feel like myself. I don't feel in my body. I'm looking at my hands, and I know they're my hands. I know they're attached to my body, but it just doesn't feel right. And at the time, I would lay on the ground, like just lay flat on the hard ground at home. And
for how long? Like how long did this go for?
It went on for a good 12 months. And honestly, I'm so grateful that my daughter was so young at the time, because this probably happened a couple of months after she was born. And so she has no recollection of any of this. And I was still able to be a mother to her. But yeah, so I'd lay on the ground because it grounded me. Wow. And that's an actual technique. And at the time it was instinctual for me to lay on the ground to connect to my body.
Wow.
Because I felt so out of body that physically grounding myself forced me to connect back with myself. And over the 12 months I actively, you name it, I tried out naturopath, counsellors. And I think the combination of that as well as time, it just eventually went away.
Wow. That's brutal.
Yeah.
So you were living with your mum when this was happening? So you were at Tasmania, this all happened, then you came back to Brisbane, stayed here and dealt with this for 12 months.
Yeah.
How old were you? Like 19 or something?
I would have still been 18 and it would have moved across to 19. Yeah.
It's amazing. What about professional or Western medicine? What about Western medicine? So like, have you been on antidepressants or antipsychotics and all those sort of things, and what's your viewpoint on those?
Yeah. At the time when this was happening, the medical professionals, other than naturopaths, like GPs, anyone related to the medical professional domain, they would just prescribe me Valium. Like it was just to subdue me, which actually made it worse. I did go on antidepressants for about 3 years, and I hated it. I think, again, it's another way of just numbing someone, and I came off them and I haven't had to go on them since. It's anyone that has gone on antidepressants, it's really hard getting on them because it's this awful transition. It messes up all the chemicals in your brain. You have weird dreams and dizzy spells and all sorts of stuff. And then coming off them, same thing. Like you're not sleeping right, you're getting bad dreams, you're getting dizzy spells and tingles, and it's not nice. Yeah.
So you went on the antidepressants, you got off the antidepressants, and then what was the actual thing that got you sort of sorted aside from just the process of time and living healthy, I guess?
It sounds really lame, but the love I had for my daughter, you said earlier she saved you, and that has been a consistent message in my head that she quite literally saved my life because if I didn't have her, I 100% wouldn't be here right now. And I know that because I would have died by drugs. I would have died by some sort of accident involving that lifestyle, or I would have killed myself. Like, I owe everything. I owe my life to her. So what saved me was that drive to do better for her. And that's like this, that's more than a therapy or a drug can ever do for someone, because it's always there. On my hardest and darkest days, I've always gotten up, because I think, if I'm not here, who's going to be there for her? I have to be here. I have to step up for her, because she deserves better.
Do you believe in, I guess, anything, I don't know what the word is, like spiritual, or do you believe in magic?
I believe in aliens.
Okay.
I believe in energy, and I think because of the experiences that I've had, I've become very good at reading people's energies, and I know if people or situations are good for me or not. And in that sense, I do believe in.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking, if all these things have happened and there's a synchronicity to it all, that, because of this, that happened, and because of that happened. I'm just thinking whether it makes you start contemplating things in a different way. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm just saying, well, I had a guy on the podcast the other day, and we were saying that sometimes you think, why did this happen for me instead of to me?
Yeah.
So some of these things actually are blessings in disguise, I guess, is the old adage. How has raising her, so from there to now, I guess, last 15 years, has there been any other, has it just been a case of you just sort of putting one foot in front of the other and improving your life? Has there been much trauma or drama in that time, or has it gone pretty straightforward?
Not really, no. It's gone pretty straightforward, and I think once I completed my bachelor's degree, I think that was something that I always thought I could never do that. I'm not that person. That's not for me. That's not the trajectory of my life. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. All the things that we tell ourselves for anything, any goals that we have, and that voice starts ticking over. And once I actually did it, it sort of clicked over to this, like, I can do fucking anything. Like, I am unstoppable. And the fact that I did it while being a sole carer, while working full time, and my daughter is high-level AFL. So most afternoons it's going from work to taking her, and I'm sitting at some sporting field, to then coming home and studying and juggling it all. And then I had to do 12 months of placement. So that added another layer to it. And don't get me wrong, it was really fucking hard. But once I did it, it was like, who is she? And then it's been this very quick upward trajectory of now I'm doing my master's, and now I'm stepping out and doing these things that I also thought I could never do, like giving comedy a crack, because I came from a place of fear. I'm so scared, and it's completely done a 360 into I'm completely fearless and I'm capable of anything. And the worst that's going to happen is I fail.
How do you give that advice to people? Like, it must be frustrating as well when you see people, because you deal with people who are in these situations.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, you want them to hurry up and have a cognition that they can, hurry up and realize that you're the person that can fix this. And how do you do that? Because I've had the same thing. I've been through a similar life story. It's the same story of going from a really sort of against the odds type situation and turning your life around. Everyone's got different characters in the story, but it's the same sort of plot line.
Yeah.
And I feel that, sometimes you meet someone who's got problems or issues, and it can be frustrating to try and say, look, I don't know how to tell you this, but you can actually do that. But in your story, I realized that you had a win. You had you beat some things, you slayed some dragons, you earned your stripes, and that's where your confidence comes from actually winning some games.
Yeah.
People out there are not winning anything, and it's hard to sort of give them that sort of win.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, yeah, absolutely. I won some things, but I had to work really hard at it. So it's more so getting people to take that first step. And once you take that first step, because I mean, if you take a step backwards in my story, I went to TAFE first to complete my high school diploma. That was my first step. And I didn't think that was all that amazing. I should have given myself more credit because, again, majority of people wouldn't even take that step. But I still at the time didn't give myself enough credit. So it was I think in my mind, The Bachelor's was the biggest sort of click for me, whereas there was all these little moments beforehand, which obviously all played their part.
Yeah.
So it's getting people to recognise that these little steps mean more than what they may think they're worth.
Do you think also, I've got a couple of questions here. One is like the people you surround yourself with, right? Obviously that makes a big difference, not having that energy that you were referring to in your life. What about I've had this discussion with about 4 or 5 different people about whether you create your own luck or whether you get lucky.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that? Do you think that you create your own luck, or do you feel that like you are a lucky person?
I think there's both for everyone. I guess if you look at it in the extremes of celebrities, and it's so easy for people to be like, oh, they just got lucky. They were at the right audition at the right time or whatever. There's still a hell of a lot of work that got them to that point. So I think there's both. There's always aspects of both.
Because I look at your situation and I think you kind of got lucky by being forced or put in a position where you had an option to move out because your parents split up, right? So look at this, like it's a negative situation. You think of it as a negative, right, when parents split up. But the fact that your parents split up meant that your mum moved to a different place away from that situation you were in. Then you had a baby and you went and lived. And if your parents were still together, maybe they'd still be in Tasmania together and maybe you wouldn't have gotten out of that. So there's like this kind of combination of, things happening for you. And then the other part of it is this is where I think you create your own luck, is that you actually have to then take those opportunities to then make the most out of it and capitalize on it, which, you have by turning your life around.
Yeah, I think we're forever in this sliding doors moment where things will happen and we have to actively make a choice, and some can be the smallest things and we don't think anything of it, and whichever way you go, whichever decision you make, it could result in something massive.
Butterfly effect.
Actually, when my dad got married, they had their sort of getaway / honeymoon in Noosa.
Remarried?
No, So left my mum.
Remarried,
and married his now wife. And they took myself and her daughter on this little post-wedding getaway in Noosa. And this was before I met my daughter's dad. So I was 15, and at the hotel we were staying at, there were construction workers. Long story short, I ended up hooking up with one of the construction workers. We went back to Tasmania. This guy kept in touch with me and he's like, I really like you. I want to be with you. I've bought you tickets to come back to Queensland and stay with me and see what happens. And it was in this period of, because I remember my daughter's dad's brother was my weed dealer, and it was in that period of me deciding what to do that I met her dad. And so there were tickets literally purchased. I could have stepped on that plane and my daughter would not exist. But I just met her father and I was more interested in that. So I pursued that option. But can you, like that, I had no idea that those were my options.
Is a 15-year-old kid allowed to do that? I just can't fathom this.
Again, it's like I think of all these things now that I'm an adult and I have a daughter that's that young and I think there's no way in hell I would let her do anything like that.
Were your parents aware of the option, and were they considering it?
Yeah, like, I mean, I remember telling my dad, at least. I can't remember having a conversation with my mum about it. Again, I think it just came down to that they knew I was going to do whatever I wanted, and they sort of had little to no control over it at that time in my life.
It's weird though, because you say you had you had a decent relationship with them.
Yeah.
In hindsight, do you reanalyze that relationship and think it was something different to what it was, or was it really just the way it was?
With my mum, yeah, she had a really rough upbringing herself. Her mum was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and my mum had a bunch of brothers. I've never met anyone from her side of the family, and they were all drug addicts, alcoholics. And my mum has never touched a cigarette, never gotten drunk. Actually, she said she got drunk once in her life when she was at uni. Doesn't gamble, doesn't do any of these sort of addictive things that, again, statistically speaking, would come from a situation. But unfortunately, her mental health deteriorated. And that was expressed in my childhood as, I guess, not being enough. So I have memories of like cleaning the kitchen and being like, oh, look what I did for you, Mum. And she'd be like, oh, well, you missed a spot, like literally, and re-wipe it. And I think that played a part in my story as well, and possibly part of why I have been able to fight harder than others, because of this unhealthy ingrained knowledge of I'm not good enough, so I have to keep trying. I think that was there for a long time, and probably a little bit still now, to be honest.
Yeah, 15 years old seems just so young, you know?
Yeah.
Is there anything that sort of, you clung to, or was it a self-driven?
Honestly, it was mostly self-driven. I don't have any standout moments where I was like, oh, I talked to this therapist or I read this book. It comes back to the biggest thing being like, I have to figure this out for her. Like, I have to figure this out for my daughter. So it was just a consistent, slow grind at how do I get better? And it was trial and error, because some things worked, some things didn't. And
I guess having a calm environment is a massive factor. Having an environment where you can actually hear your own thoughts. And it seems like you found a place like that at your mum's anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just tell us what a flexi school is for those who don't really know.
So a flexi school is for anyone who doesn't fit into a mainstream standard school. That can be for mental health reasons, disability, youth justice, so kids that are involved in a lot of crime and in and out of juvie. So I'd finished uni and landed this job at a flexi school as a student counsellor, and I thought I'd just hit the jackpot because of my background. Obviously, this job meant so much to me. But my experience over the nearly 12 months that I was there was high level of corruption, and this school was using these kids for the funding that they come with from the government, utilising that for their own needs and only placing further trauma on these kids. And me being me, because I am outspoken and I'm sassy, I was constantly like, what the fuck? You can't do that to this kid. Like, this is illegal or this is unethical.
Give me an example. Like, think of an example that you've experienced and explain it to me how that would actually happen.
Probably one of the worst things that happened there. I was in my office with two male students. A teacher came barreling in, ripped open the door and was like, Sam, are these boys meant to be in your office? Are you meant to have all of these boys in your office? And I was like, it's cool. He was just getting a lolly and leaving. It's fine. This kid has then extremely blown up, and he's gone around the school, ended up in a lockdown because he wanted to stab this teacher.
Right.
The police came. He ran across the road to his youth justice office and ended up getting arrested there. 2 days later, he was back in juvie. Not because of that incident, but a direct line because of that incident. It got brought up in court, but he was so heightened over that period of time. If you look at that in a timeline, that incident happened, which would have been really traumatic and upsetting. 2 days later, he was asked to get into a stolen car. He was probably like at that point, yeah, fuck it, because the people that are meant to care and respect me don't. That's what was going through his head, because this teacher, her ego was what was important. I'm the teacher. I'm in charge. You respect me. We're a fucking flexi school, mate. Like, you know who we're dealing with. I'm not saying let kids disrespect you, but there's a way in which you deal with it. Not to mention the disrespect that she had to me coming into my space where I had clients. That would be like me walking into her classroom mid her presenting whatever in her classroom and being like, excuse me, sorry, I don't think that's how that's meant to be done. Are you meant to have all these students in your class? Like, it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And this was constant, this not knowing how to work with these kids and not caring to upskill or do the right things. This school had no behaviour policy. A flexi school had no behaviour policy. So when a child vaped, the outcome for that child would be very different to another child's outcome depending on who the child was and how the teachers and the principal viewed that child.
It's all arbitrary, so it's all just sort of made up on the spot. And
100%.
Yeah, that's very. So I think then you don't get it. You know, I think with those schools and with kids who are in these sort of situations, obviously come from traumatic backgrounds, you want to de-escalate everything, and it seems like that's just escalating things.
Yeah.
Is any of it working, I guess is the question. Like, is any of it working? We have this exacerbated youth crime situation. It's exploding. And is there anyone actually getting results?
If it's done properly, I think there are results that can and do happen. For schools, for example, attendance is a big thing. They'll focus on the attendance rather than what's causing the non-attendance. And it's like you're working backwards. You're focusing on the wrong thing. If you actually focus on what's causing the non-attendance, that will lead to attendance. But these experts and the people that are in charge of making the policies and the rules at schools don't think like that.
Is it because there's no money in it? Like, is it a for-profit model?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these things, you follow the money, and you always find that there's money. There's money in. It's like someone asked me the other day. He said, "Are you saying they're not doing it because there's no money in it?" And I said, "No, they're not doing it because there is money in it." You know what I mean? Is it a case of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's similar to the cure for cancer. Do they want to find a cure for cancer? Because there's no money in that necessarily. Like, how many drugs are on the market? Chemotherapy, radiation. It's just endless pools of money. It's similar to do they really want to find an answer to this? Because then there's no money in it. There's no
well, it ends the economy of it, right? So the economy of profiteering off these people in these situations, because it seems to me in a lot of these discussions I've had with people that none of these solutions actually seem to get results. That's why when I asked you about your KPIs, like I know it's tough with therapy, right? To KPI progress, but if we could somehow incentivize results that we want, incentivize, like if that school got paid more money, the less kids went into juvie.
Yes.
If that school got funded more money, or conversely, if that school got less money, if more of their students went to juvie, or less money if more of their kids didn't graduate, or less money if more of their kids didn't have a basic reading level or something, or even if teachers were incentivized to get these results, I'm sure we would make a difference in some way, or they should at least try it.
Yeah.
You know?
I still go back to, and look, I don't know how you fix this in a big picture. I go back to these kids need connection, and they need to find connection to themselves, because a lot of the time they don't really know themselves. They'll put on the big sort of swagger thing, especially like the youth justice ones, and they're like, I don't give a shit and fuck the police, and like that is literally how they come across and speak.
Yeah, well, they identify as American gangsters. Like a lot of the culture comes from the US rap sort of scene. So
And me going into this school, and I was working with a lot of these kids, and I would just call them out. I'm like, you can't do that shit with me because I see through it and I'm not scared of you. Like a lot of the kids would try to intimidate you. And so I sort of built this rep with these kids. And honestly, my role at that school became being the safe person that these kids trusted, so that when shit went like absolute nuts, because there was constant fights, like every week there was physical fights, and I took time to build trust and respect with them. And that's what I mean by that backwards way of working, is you've actually got to start at the back end, not jump to, you have to listen to me, you have to follow this rule. Because ultimately they did listen to me and follow my rules. But that's because I worked from the bottom up.
How do you get connection with what? How do these kids get connection with themselves and with the community?
So when it comes down to you as an individual, it's going, well, what does your community look like to you? What are your interests? Like, do you like to play footy? Do you like to do gardening? There's gardening community groups. Like whatever it is, there is something out there for literally everyone, especially these days. You can't tell me, oh, there's nowhere that does my interests. There is something for everyone. There is a community for everyone. You got to take the steps. So like I can only take you so far.
So what and how do we get, like, let's take an example of some kid that's from a, well, let's put this into practice, right? So you've got a kid that's really dealing with, a broken home, violence, drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
Like how do we get how do we encourage them to connect with the community?
I guess the hardest part is initially finding that person that can guide them. But I think there's a big market and a need for big brother, big sister type roles. Where you connect with schools and flexi schools in particular, you connect with youth justice, and you come on as this role model. So you can guide these kids. You sort of, your first part of your job is building the rapport, building the trust, building the respect, and that would look like going to the field, cooking a footy, taking the kids out for lunch, whatever it is. And then through that long-term trust and respect, they'll listen to you and open up to you enough so you can go, hey, mate, like there's this footy club, they're willing to take you on free of charge. How about you go out and kick the footy with them this week and see what you think?
Yeah. I think also like what I've noticed as well as a small business person, and I've talked to a few people about the destruction of small businesses. I think they used to play a really big role in the community.
Yeah.
Like the local, like my son wants to get a job at the moment and he's thinking of, and I look at where he's possibly going to work, like, Office Works or McDonald's and I think, although they're great, I don't think he's going to get a one-on-one mentor as he may have got back in the day where he worked at the local news agency or if he worked for the local cafe and those more community, less corporate sort of businesses. And he might actually talk to the actual boss who actually explains how the world works and how, you know what I mean? And I think there's a lot of the local pizza shops and the local sort of, just the little community businesses that aren't there anymore. When I think that's been a real kick to the whole connection process.
I agree. Yep.
And with connecting with self, right? So you mentioned connecting with self. What does that look like?
In short, it's knowing who you are and not giving a fuck. As long as you're not hurting yourself or others, obviously. And the work that goes into that, again, it comes down to an individual and how you source that out and what you do with that. And it's not a quick fix. And the biggest part of it is needing to reflect and being okay with admitting faults and admitting when you're wrong. Again, that comes back to ego, and that's where a lot of the problems come from, because it's hard to reflect on yourself and some of your behaviors and go, that probably isn't okay, or I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that. Especially when it's coming from someone else. It's not necessarily your self-reflection. Someone's pulled you up and gone, hey, Sean, like, I don't think you should do those podcasts because they're really hurting my feelings. Like,
sorry about that.
You would have to sit and reflect and either go, no, I'm not. Like that was after some reflection and deciding whatever you needed to decide. I'm not hurting anyone. Or you would have to go, that could hurt someone's feelings. Like what I said in that podcast maybe hurt someone's feelings or whatever. That was probably a bad example. I actually last night, right, had this girl message me on my new Instagram, and she sent me a photo of my Instagram page, circled my bio and said, can you please explain this? And she was referencing, and look, it's my own fault because who am I to think I could quote myself?
Who was this person?
Just a random girl. Just a random girl. And I had in my bio, I'm too pretty to have a fucking disability. And I quoted it.
Tell us about your disability. Tell us about MS, you know?
So, yeah, I 2 years ago got diagnosed with MS, which is multiple sclerosis.
Talk us through it. What was happening to you to make you want to actually even get checked for multiple sclerosis?
So I had what my neurologist now says was a migraine. I'd actually been at the pub with an old colleague. I had 2 glasses of wine, and I remember they dropped me home, and I remember when I was walking from the car to my front door, I felt like really unstable and really dizzy, and then I got this pounding headache and I was throwing up. It almost was like I'd drunk a couple of bottles of wine, but I only had 2 glasses. And I called my best friend and I was like, I'm really sick. I don't know. And look, initially she was like, Sam, go to bed. You've had too much to drink. And I was like, I swear to you, I've had 2 glasses. I'm really scared. Something's really wrong. So she came over. This was probably about 10 o'clock at night. She came over and she says now, when I first saw you, Sam, I thought you were having a stroke because you were like, I couldn't look up, like the light, I was really light sensitive. So she called an ambulance and they took me in and they did a bunch of tests. So I went in to see the neurologist and she was sort of like, look, with MS, you can't do a diagnosis without lesions and symptoms. You have to have both. And she did not believe that whatever it was that night
episode
was an MS episode. She thought it was a migraine. I'm not a neurologist, but I don't agree with her, but whatever. So we left it, and then it was pretty much almost instantly after. It was like within no more than 2 weeks. My bottom half of my legs went numb, and I woke up one morning and I'd wet the bed. And so then I went and had another scan, and there was more lesions, and then there was lesions and symptoms. So she could go, yes, you have MS. And the thought of taking these hardcore medications, because they're really intense medications, and the one she pushed for me has only been approved since I think 2019, and it's typically a chemo drug. It's a chemo drug. It's just in tablet form rather than
intravenously.
Yes, thank you. So she gave me the pamphlet and the information to read, and it's like black box and risk of death and risk of heart failure and all of the horrific things. And you're sitting there, and given that I'd had fairly minimal symptoms, I'm like, fuck that. I'll take my chances. Like, I'm not going to touch this shit. And my neurologist called me and I said, I don't think I'm going to, I think I'm just going to.
I think I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good. I don't know. Thank you. And she was like, look, Sam, I've had patients that have had anxiety over this, but seriously, like, and she basically said, like, pull your fucking head in. If you don't take this drug, you're going to end up in a wheelchair. So if I woke up tomorrow and couldn't walk and could no longer get her to all her footy events, that would crush me. Like, that would crush me.
What is that? Do you think that this prompted you to try and look into comedy? And I think as the comedy, and I know you've kind of reinvented yourself a little bit on Instagram and stuff. Has that all been off the back of just kind of wanting to? I don't know. Is there boxes that you want to start ticking faster, or is it a way of coping, the comedy?
I think at the end of the day, like, if we can't laugh at ourselves, if we can't make fun of ourselves, if we can't find joy and new experiences, like, nothing else matters. It doesn't. Like, I look at my life and my main thing is the relationship that I have with my daughter. And I've been single for 3 years now. And even before that, it was like, I don't really care in the context of I've experienced and will continue to experience the purest form of love that I believe exists. And, like, I feel like the luckiest person alive because my daughter is my daughter, but she's my best friend, and we sort of have interactions like siblings sometimes. And that's because of a few things of how close we are in age, and it's always just been me and her against the world sort of thing. And
has there been any moments with her? Like, has she ever had any setbacks or issues?
She got diagnosed with ADHD last year, and she has a bit of social anxiety where, and look, I say this, but all teenagers have this, where it's like, I want to be cool, I want to fit in. That's a big social dilemma for a 14-year-old to have. Part of the reason why I don't want to have more kids is because what I have with her is so special. I don't want to share that with another child. It's not that I wouldn't love another child. I don't want to love another child. I want to give all of my love to this child.
Yeah. What is ADHD like in this sense? How did that happen?
So there's two main forms of ADHD. One's a hyper. So that's where you'll typically see a kid's like not able to sit still, and there'll be this in school, and they're moving of the leg and they're looking around. She's inattentive, and it only affects her in the classroom. So even in this scenario, if you tried to do a podcast with her, she'd be like to sit and just focus and have a conversation, especially in a quiet room. And that's what school is. Sit in the classroom, look at the screen, look at your computer, listen to the teacher talk for half an hour. Her brain can't do that. She has a job. She's been working since she was 13. Doesn't affect her in her workplace.
Does she have to take any medication, or what's the diagnosis and the treatment?
So only recently she's started Ritalin, which is one of the main drugs they dispense. So she'll just take it for school. Where neither of us are really sure, because I'm sort of seeing my view, she's reflecting on her view. I see it as not really necessary, particularly because it's only while she's in the classroom, but it's not a build-up drug.
But what makes someone go to the doctors for not focusing in school? Like, obviously it hasn't affected me, and I don't really know much about it. But like, is it to the point where it's like, like, how does that become an issue where you go, okay, let's go see the doctor for this?
I would have teachers coming to me at parent-teacher interviews or emails saying that your daughter hasn't completed stuff or hasn't paid attention, or they would view it as like purposely not paying attention. Like she's just being she's a disengaged, probably a good word to use, disengaged student. And, I would see moments where she would come across disengaged, and I would think, God, if I was your teacher, I would as well be like, this kid just doesn't give a shit. Like that's sort of what it comes, that inattentive, it comes across like they don't care, like they're not paying attention. And I said to a teacher at once, because we were at, they had to do this self-presentation PowerPoint thing, and it was just her at a table. I was sitting next to her and her teacher, and she was sort of like, and just reading down like here, and didn't want to look at the screen. And I said to her teacher, I was like, is this how she's in the classroom? Is this? Yeah. And he's like, yeah, that's the only version of her that I ever see. You see her in the workplace or the footy field or at home, completely different kid, like has all the confidence in the world. Well, the reason I ask is it's just like there's a few people I've spoken to, and it's quite controversial still, and I think that's why I wanted to get your take on your experience with it. I think from the bits and pieces that I've seen and read about being controversial is there's been this big movement of trauma and how trauma is expressed in the body. And so a lot of people that believe in that in its purest sense would go, Sam has MS because of all her trauma. Maybe it played part, maybe it didn't, I don't know. And people might, even if you looked at my daughter and it's be like, her dad wasn't involved and that was a trauma. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. And maybe that's where the ADHD came from. Or maybe it's just who people are. I do believe that genetically some people are just born with genetic traits, and it doesn't matter if you've got the most perfect upbringing or not. I think, again, it's one of those, there's a bit of both.
Well, the pushback I get is more around like it actually being having what do they call it? basically exhibiting specifically diagnosable symptoms
Yeah.
rather than just sort of arbitrary opinions and,
Yeah.
like when it comes to paying attention, like how do you grade paying attention?
Yeah.
There's a pathology, sorry,
Yeah.
is the word I'm looking for. There's
Yeah.
no pathology. There's no blood test for ADHD.
No,
And that's
no.
where I think a lot of people, argue the point whether it is actually something that could be overdiagnosed and could be something that's causing a problem, whether the solution is worse than the problem in the sense that, we're medicating a child here because she won't pay attention in class. And so, there are people that, and that's why I was wondering if you'd had any sort of thoughts on that,
And look, even her psychiatrist, they do the test, which is a parent assessment. You fill out a 120 checkbox thing.
Mm-hmm.
She does her own self-assessment. A teacher does an assessment. And then that puts all together these beautiful little graphs and it puts you in whatever category.
Mm-hmm.
You can see how that's not really that great of a tool.
Yeah.
And for my daughter in particular, even the psychiatrist said it's unusual that her ADHD is only in the classroom. Typically it would show up in other domains like work or sport or home.
I think there's that skepticism we sort of spoke about with pharmaceutical companies and for-profit organisations. That's all. That's what I was just, wondering what your thoughts were on that,
Yeah, and I mean Ritalin's not a build-up drug. So you take it, it works or doesn't work immediately. It goes away fairly quickly. It's like a 3-4 hour life in your body. So that's good and bad. And it's an amphetamine. Like that's what it is. It's a glorified version of speed. And whether you have ADHD or not, you're going to have a come down. So it's hard for me as a parent to watch her in the afternoons. Her moods are off. And then on the weekends when she doesn't take it because she doesn't need it on the weekends and there's no – like that's sort of the to-do thing. You take it when needed.
How does she feel about it? What's her feedback? She's saying it's work. It's only new, right? How long has she been on it?
A month maybe.
Yeah. And is she reporting it's working or it's better or?
It's been mixed.
Yeah.
I think she does see a difference in the classroom, but then she's acknowledged she's really tired and moody in the afternoons. I don't see her as an adult needing it.
Yeah.
And I think she views it that way as well because even if you look at university, the way university works, it's different. Like there are places where you have to focus, but there's ways to work around uni that classrooms don't
Plus
offer.
you'll be studying stuff you're more interested in.
Yeah.
And your interest levels are generally higher.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, it's been awesome having you in. Great chatting to you.
Yeah, no, it was fun.
That was fun. Yeah, I've learnt a lot, talked about a lot and good luck with everything.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.